So you want to start a video game studio, and I keep asking you all these questions. Why don't I take some of my own medicine and walk through my answers to these questions? First, a bit of a revelation. I arguably already have a video game studio. It's called TRIAGE Games or TRIAGE Games, depending on how you want to say it. It is a studio that exists at the moment largely to support my consulting business. I say triage or triage because when it is focused on helping out other studios, it is TRIAGE Games. And when it is focused on game development, it would be TRIAGE Games, though it's not doing any game development on its own at the moment. The symbol, which I really like, is an hourglass, but it is also kind of a little targeting reticle, so lots of stuff going on. We will talk about triage/triage games at a later date. Let's walk through the 6 questions through this lens and talk through what my answers would be. First up, why? I left a pretty high-paying job back in 2021. Money would not be the reason for me to start a studio that would be making video games. I could, in all likelihood, find another executive producer job and go back into the industry at a AAA studio and basically go back to the job that I had before. So if it was about money, this is not the way to go about it. 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I could certainly see spite being one of the answers that I would give for the why question. I like to think that I've moved past that. Like I said, spite is an effective fuel, but it burns really dirty. So getting yourself off of that kind of motivation is a healthy thing to attempt to do. Certainly one of my goals for creating the YouTube channel, and I would like to see continue through any sort of video game development work that I'm doing, would be trying to find ways to improve the industry as a whole, whether that be through testing out different methodologies or exploring different spaces or communicating the things that I have learned. That would be part of my why. I do think that there are stories I have left to tell, and there are also bits of gameplay that I'm interested in exploring. Trying new things is also a legitimate why for me as well. Reconnecting to my technical roots and relearning how to be a programmer and how to work in a video game engine, how to bring everything all together. This would all form the basis of a why for me. But a lot of that could be accomplished in other ways. At the end of the day, for me, the fundamental why is really about control, about me not having to report to someone that is dictating what the game is going to be or who gets to make the decisions on a day-to-day basis, of being the person where the buck stops, of being the person that gets to make the call. The buck stopped with me as EP, but in a weird way, I wasn't the one making most of the calls. I was either delegating that decision-making power downwards in a lot of cases, or decisions were being made above me and then moving down and being enacted by me. One thing for me, a big part of my why would be getting some of that control. More than any of the other parts of why, that last bit, control, really informs the what from the studio level. Being at the scale of big indie or even normal indie requires giving up a lot of control to publishing partners or other partners you're bringing in at the foundation level to provide you with capital and with manpower. Indeed, you might argue that the best place to have control is way down at the solo level. Assuming you are financially stable, being a solo developer means you can do basically whatever you want. If you don't even want to make a game, you don't have to. That does require you to be in a relatively stable financial situation, which I am at the moment. But of course, working solo means you have to do everything. And I am well aware that I have some blind spots and some skill gaps that would be useful to be filled. The small indie that I talked about where it's you and a bunch of your friends or a bunch of partners, that doesn't feel right because again, that means you're sharing control with those other partners. But maybe something in the small indie space where it's me and some other people working for me, that starts to make a little bit of sense. Now, as I said, TRIAGE Games exists as a place to support my consulting business at the moment. So The reality is right now, this is an outsourcing studio. It's just a very strange outsourcing studio because it's not making art or audio or doing programming for people. It's providing production consulting. I definitely have seen the disconnect between these two endeavors, where there's consulting on one side, which pays the bills, brings in money, and then there's video game development, which doesn't do any of those things and realistically would never make as much as the consulting. So definitely there is a balancing act, and I do see the risk of getting trapped in this consulting stance and not being able to do more video game development. So something to think about. As we move to the second part of what kind of games would Triage Studios or TRIAGE Studios make, then it's about looking about who we have. Well, who we have is me, who has 24 years of working on RPGs and story-driven games. And definitely that would naturally be the kind of game that this studio would gravitate towards. It's the way that I think about solving problems through RPG systems and through storytelling. Would it be an RPG? Probably, but it wouldn't necessarily have to be. It would just be something that would be focused on characters and on conversations and on RPG systems. Probably when you put those three things into a bucket and stir it up, you're gonna get an RPG out the other side, but not necessarily. On the setting side, we obviously have been toying around with high T on the high Cs in the YouTube channel to talk about the way that video game development works through the lens of an actual game. I think that that's a realistic place to start, but I'm not particularly attached to any particular setting. We touched on it in what, but let's move on to who. Right now, this is a studio of one person. It is me. I like to believe that I'm well aware of my weaknesses. So for me, the big things that are missing are, one, I am a good story shaper and a reasonably good story crafter, but I'm not a super great storyteller. So storytelling in that very fast, in the elevator, getting the deal done, shaking the handshake, that sort of stuff, that's a big gap for me. Now, while I don't think I have wooden eyes, I have built the skills to provide feedback on art and provide critique. I do not have the skills in terms of building art. So the art skills, animation skills, this is a big gap for me as well. Audio, arguably I do have wooden ears, so making a soundtrack or attaching audio to a game that I was making would definitely be a big risk. On the design side, I think I'm okay, good enough to get it done. Writing, probably going to be a bit of a challenge as well, but probably in an okay place to at least get the ball rolling. So who am I adding to my semi-imaginary studio? First person I'm looking for is someone who is a storyteller, someone who can be my partner in the boardroom, at the conference, shaking hands and getting interest in this game. Ideally, that person is also a money guy, meaning that they have contacts in the industry or very deep pockets so that they can help us keep the lights on. The other thing that we're going to start looking for right away is someone to provide some diversity of voice. Obviously, white, male, cis, with a very Western outlook on things. As we are looking to fill some of these roles, looking to also diversify our voices. Ideally, people are able to check many of these checkboxes at once. So if you can find someone who is an artist who also is a storyteller, that's amazing. If they also bring some different perspectives, that's even better. So we start filling in this matrix with as few people as we can get away with that give us as broad of a coverage of these missing skill sets as we possibly can. So storyteller, number one. Then probably from a skill set perspective, I would look for someone who can work in art and animation and ideally audio so that we cover that gap. Moving past that, I would be strongly inclined to add a writer to the team. If we're going to be doing storytelling, it would be good just to have someone who has done this professionally in some capacity, at least, that can provide the extra expertise that is likely going to be required. So then if we've got to 3 or 4 people, my next person, I would actually be inclined to add a tech person. I'm relatively comfortable with my technological background. But I am a finisher. I can struggle at the beginning of a technical project where it's just a million buttons and setting up the project. It would be nice to have someone who can balance that with me to provide more technological understanding and thinking and just balance it out, provide extra horsepower. In a perfect world, that person would also be able to provide technical design and design work. Again, what we're looking for here, we're in small indie space. Everyone is wearing a lot of hats. So if you're hiring a tech person, ideally they are also a designer or an artist or a writer or something so that they can fill many roles, so they can wear many hats. Because as you are moving around and trying to work, if there are only 5 or 6 or 7 of you, then you're going to need people that can pitch in and pick up a rifle when that's what is needed to be done. Moving to the 3 more tactical questions. When I would be trying for something in the 1 to 2 year range. Relevancy is important, even though this would be obviously deep into the indie space. So it's not that the technology is going to age out. If you are hiring people, they're going to want to get something on their resume. Once you're moving beyond 2 years, they're going to start getting antsy and start looking for other opportunities. That's also going to use quite a bit of money just to do 2 years. Once you're going past 2 years, it means more and more financing is required. And every time you are adding financing, you are losing control. And since one of my major whys was control, as much as possible, you want this to be self-financed so that you're not having to give away that control. The longer you go, the bigger your team gets, the more control you're going to have to give up in order to just pay the bills. Where is interesting because I never fully adapted to online work when I was at BioWare. That being said, I think now in 2023, the only way to go is online only. I strongly believe that at least for the time being, hybrid is a dangerous trap. The way that I would be strongly inclined to go, especially for a studio this small, would be to go online only. So people are distributed around the world and we are working together using Slack or likely Discord and Zoom as our communication channel. And there is no physical office space or headquarters. Everyone is working out of their house or whatever other shed that they are choosing to work out of. And we are dispersed. I don't love that, but I think that's the reality of the world that we live in right now. And I think hybrid is very dangerous. Would I consider making a physical studio? There are 5 or 6 of us in the same city. We know each other and renting out some office space. There are certainly a lot of advantages in terms of what I'm familiar with to that. That being said, it does automatically jump your costs up a bunch, because now you have to rent that space and potentially have an office manager and buy furniture, and it just adds a whole bunch of things. So much as my instinct says that in-person has advantages that I understand, I would be almost guaranteed to go entirely online, entirely virtual, and just embrace that and try to build team culture and team structure around that design of studio. Would we do offsites where we gather everyone together? I think that would be ideal, at least once every year or so, get everyone together so at least you kind of anchor them in your mind as a person. But for the most part, yep, everyone's in their house on Zoom working remotely. Then the really tactical stuff, how? So engine, Unreal, it is one of only really 2 realistic choices for someone who is going to use an existing engine and doesn't have any momentum behind it. And the reason why Unreal over Unity for me is platforms, I would definitely go PC and consoles and neglect the mobile and less powerful platforms for the time being. 2 reasons for that. One, it's where my expertise is from. It's what I have historically done. It's what I understand the best. It is also the place where storytelling games, as I understand them, are most successful. There are some things on the phones that do storytelling. I don't fully understand that space. And also, the second reason, monetization on mobile is very different than what I'm used to. For a game that I'm making, starting point for me would be it's a purchased product, probably not boxed, purchased product that has no DLC, no live service, no microtransactions, nothing. It is just a game you buy for $5 or $10 or $15 or $20 or $30 or $40. That is a self-contained event that you then patch maybe to deal with whatever bugs escaped, but you're not planning for any DLC. You're certainly not planning for a long tail live service. This is not the most lucrative part of the video game industry at the moment. It's arguably the least lucrative part of the video game industry, but it's the place where storytelling can exist without compromise. It is the place that I understand the best, and I think there is going to be a renaissance in this style of game over the next few years. Why not be a part of that? Studio structure. So you need structure even at a very small size, but when you're down in the below 10, you can be pretty flat. Obviously, I'm in charge. That's part of the why, but you want everyone else to have relative autonomy. If the studio was ever to grow, I am curious about the idea of having professional people, so professional managers, professional people whose job it is to grow careers. For two reasons. One, this allows you to have people whose responsibility and primary measurement of success is the success of the other people. And two, it frees up the other dev leaders to focus on the dev side of their job. That's not to say that you would expect no leadership from those dev leads. In fact, what you would be pushing for would be to separate the management from the leadership and make it the dev lead's job to lead their team to success and the manager's job to make the people as successful as possible. Is that realistic? I don't know, but I am tempted to try something like that if the studio was ever to reach the point where it was needing that kind of extra structure. On the process side, hourglass, meaning focusing on one thing and using that focus to drive decision-making across the project as a whole. Hourglass, pretty easy to do on a really small team. Hourglass also means dailies, which means looking at the game a lot and using that feedback loop to, again, drive decision-making. Maybe influenced by my YouTube channel, I really like the idea of development out loud, meaning that you are sharing your process with the community as a whole as you're going and bringing them on the journey with you. I think there is a huge opportunity to educate the game buying public more on how games are made. And so why not take the opportunity to bring them into the fold? And then tools, pretty much the standard indie tool set, which is whatever is most easily accessible and most affordable. So that probably means using the Google suite of Office apps as opposed to the Microsoft suite, because one is free and the other isn't, much as I prefer PowerPoint. Discord over Slack. It probably means using Discord over even Zoom. And this would then keep your cost under control as much as you can. There are my answers. Hopefully, if you are actually looking to start your own video game studio, the shape of some of my answers will help spur you to answering these questions yourself. Triage Games is a real thing, but TRIAGE Games, the version of the studio that actually makes games, not really a real thing at the moment. Will it become a real thing? I guess wait and see. It's certainly not there right now. A special thanks to my members. They provide the resources that this channel needs to keep running. If you are interested in becoming a member, there's a link to that down in the description. If you found this series interesting and want me to talk more about new studios and things that you should do in the early days of your studio, let me know that down in the comments and maybe we'll revisit this topic. We have merch now. This is the High Tea on the High Seas t-shirt. There is a shelf below this video if you're interested in picking something up. And if you found this interesting or useful, give it a thumbs up because that helps YouTube share it around. So this turned into 5 videos. Do you feel like you want to run out and start your own video game studio? What would you call it? What are some of the answers to these questions that you would use for your own studio? Let's talk about it down in the comments. I will see you again soon. Thank you.